We live in a time where dignity has essentially become a punchline. When someone says, have dignity, they're usually telling you to stop embarrassing yourself on TikTok or to put on the proper shirt before you go out. It's essentially become a weapon for social shaming, a way to enforce conformity. But this wasn't always what dignity meant. And honestly, I think we've lost something really profound in this shift in definitions. So, today, I want to talk about dignity, what it actually means philosophically, why it matters, and how you can cultivate a genuine sense of dignity in your own life. Because I think understanding dignity properly might be one of the most important things that you can do for your own well being and your sense of self worth. So, let's start with a bit of history. Throughout most of human civilization, dignity referred to social standing. In ancient Rome, dignitas meant distinction, honor, and glory, but only for aristocrats and public officials. You had dignity if you were held in high office and conducted yourself according to the norms of that position. Medieval traditions continued this slightly, but they linked dignity to one's place in a spiritual or natural hierarchy. Dignity was something that you earned through status or something that was bestowed upon you by birth. But then something remarkable happened during the Enlightenment period, particularly with Immanuel Kant. Dignity was reconceptualized as an absolute, unconditional worth possessed by all human beings, not because of what they achieved or their social status, but simply because they were rational, autonomous beings capable of moral self determination. And this idea, as with many of Kant's ideas, was revolutionary. It meant that a peasant had just as much dignity as a king, that dignity was intrinsic, inalienable, and equal across all of humanity. So we've essentially inherited two very different meanings of dignity that still compete in our language today. There is intrinsic dignity, the unconditional value that you possess simply by being human. And then there is the extrinsic dignity, or the social dignity, the respect and recognition that you receive from others for meeting certain social standards. But modern philosophy, especially following Kant, argues that only intrinsic dignity can serve as a robust foundation for ethics and human rights. Social dignity is conditional, fluctuating, and vulnerable to the public whims of public opinion. But intrinsic dignity is permanent and unconditional and can't be revoked by anyone. But in everyday language, when people talk about dignity, they almost always mean the social kind. And I think this confusion is causing some real damage. Because when is the last time you actually heard somebody say, have some dignity? I would wager that it's probably been a while. Because that phrase, once common, has largely vanished from everyday speech. And I think understanding why it disappears reveals something crucial about our current culture. For most of history, have dignity was tied almost exclusively to conservative social behaviors and conformity. It meant conform to what respectable people do, follow the codes of proper conduct, and don't embarrass yourself or your family. It was about maintaining appearances and adhering to group standards. And this dignity was conditional, earned, and easily lost through deviation from any of the established norms. And because our culture has shifted significantly in recent times, dignity is seen as something unimportant. And so, predictably, people have rebelled. And as we became more individualistic, as we questioned the traditional hierarchies and social codes, have dignity became associated with oppressive conformity. It sounded like your grandmother telling you to sit up straight and stop laughing so loud. And it felt like a tool of social control rather than genuinely meaningful. So we collectively stopped saying it and stopped caring about it. But the problem is, when we throw out the phrase, we're throwing out the concept entirely. We rejected dignity because it had been so thoroughly conflated with social conformity that we couldn't see past that association and get back to the intrinsic dignity. We raged against the machine, and in doing so, we lost access to something profoundly important. What if the problem wasn't dignity itself, but how we have been talking about it? What if instead of have dignity, which focuses on external behavior and social performance, we said show some self respect or respect your own value? These phrases point inward rather than outward. They emphasize the intrinsic value rather than the social conformity that nobody likes. The crucial distinction is that social dignity asks, what will others think? While intrinsic dignity asks, am I acting in accordance with my own principles and my own inherent value as a person? And this is where Kant's philosophy becomes vital because he gives us a way to rescue dignity from its association with social conformity. And Kant argued that dignity stems from rational autonomy, or your capacity to govern yourself according to morals and principles that you recognize as valid, rather than simply following external pressures or social expectations. Every rational being, Kant claimed, has unconditioned and incomparable worth, not because of what you produce or how others approve of you, but because you have the capacity for moral self determination. You can reflect on principles and choose to act according to them, and hold yourself accountable to the standards that you endorse. And this leads to his famous formulation to treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means, but always at the same time as an end. But what does that mean? Well, it means respecting the autonomy and moral worth of every person, including you. It means never reducing yourself to a mere instrument for achieving some external goal, even if that goal is social approval. And crucially, Kant insisted that this dignity is absolute and inalienable. You can't lose it through embarrassing behavior, but you also can't gain more of it through achievement. Every human being stands on equal moral ground. But now we are constantly performing for an audience, measuring our worth by likes, followers, and engagement metrics. We have become instruments for generating attention and approval rather than an ends in ourselves. Our sense of self worth has become desperately fragile and conditional, dependent on the ever shifting tides of social media algorithms and public opinions. We've just traded one external standard for another. Instead of conforming to grandma's rules about proper behavior, we're conforming to whatever gets engagement online. We rejected the old social dignity, but never replaced it with anything better. We're still treating ourselves as a means, but just a means to a different ends. The Kantian perspective offers an escape from this trap. It says that your worth is not determined by any external value. neither traditional social codes or social media metrics. But your dignity is intrinsic, grounded in your capacity for autonomous moral action. So, how do you actually cultivate this kind of dignity in your own life? How do you build what we might call philosophical self respect rooted in your intrinsic worth rather than just social approval? Well, first, you need to internalize the equal, unconditional moral standing that you share with every other human being. This isn't about ego or thinking that you're special or above anybody else, but recognizing that you are no more and no less valuable than anyone else simply by virtue of being human. You don't need to earn your basic worth because it's already there. Second, practice moral consistency. This means aligning your actions with rational moral principles rather than the external validation of shifting social norms. Live according to the principles that you can defend, principles that treat other people as ends rather than means. Third, value and exercise your autonomy. Autonomy does not mean just doing whatever you feel like, because that's often just being a slave to your impulses. But real autonomy means to make decisions thoughtfully, with integrity, and reflecting on your true values rather than simply conforming to what others expect of you. Don't surrender your moral agency to algorithms, influencers, or mob opinion. Fourth, practice philosophical self respect. Adopt a value stance toward yourself. Treat yourself with the same respect owed to all humanity. Recognize your intrinsic value and refuse to compromise your ethical principles for convenience or approval. Fifth, recognize dignity in others. Dignity only thrives when it's actually mutual. Treat others with genuine respect, regardless of their status, political stances, mistakes, or disagreements. Challenge practices and institutions that undermine basic human worth and offer genuine praise and encouragement. And finally, and I think this might be the most difficult part, build resilience against shame. Philosophical dignity is not weakened by social shaming. It does involve maintaining your ethical integrity independent of external opinion. This doesn't mean that you're going to be immune to criticism, though, but it does mean that you should not measure your fundamental worth by whether others approve of you. If you want to build a stronger philosophical sense of dignity, choose to respect the intrinsic worth in yourself and others, regardless of status or approval. And maybe our society will get a little bit of dignity back. So, with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see y'all next time.